The right rhyme. Oh, hang on. I'm being interrupted by weird laughter. This is very appropriate. So I
Sorry
interrupt
to
myself.
interrupt.
Are you all right, Fergus and Sonny and the bat?
Yeah, Sonny pointed out the go live button.
It's a really big button in the top corner.
Top
Damn it.
corner.
It's always the go live button. It's always the button on the right.
Okay, so
All right.
can we spotlight the relevant people for everyone or not? Hang on. Sorry, you may.
Where'd you get to in the poem, Kate?
Shall I continue the poem?
I love
Go
that.
on.
I thought that was. I was thinking about. Do you ever have those bits where? I mean, I think it's different. I think you have to be a lot more careful when you're a man. But I was on the tube and there was a woman with the most amazing shoes and dress, but I knew I couldn't say anything because then she'd be trapped. You know what I mean?
Yes.
But that bit of having the whole nevertheless, you kind of play the conversation in your head, so at least one version has occurred of how you were going to compliment someone for looking remarkable.
Oh, and that makes me, yeah, in that way, I am so glad to be a woman and female presenting, because actually that is one of my main conduits and recipient channels of neurodivergent joy and weird pride, really. Like when you spot a fellow weirdly dressed person and the happiness that that brings you.
Yeah.
So you just have to have that, like, oh, repressed and inside. That is sad. But if you dressed more weirdly, your gender wouldn't matter. I would contend, maybe, if you see what I mean, because you would meet on the grounds of the shared weird above the grounds of whatever was happening gender-wise, maybe. Debate.
Yeah, I don't know. I think about it quite a lot. It's just because I think I've realised more and more how many men are creepy, and I've not realised quite what the number was because I've got two older sisters who wouldn't have let me be that. Thank heavens.
Yeah, it's a high number, Robin. It's very high.
I think I'm generally seen. I think I do look avuncular and non-threatening. My friend Gina once said that. Lovely Gina Ryan, sadly no longer with us. And I did a gig with her, comedy camp. It was an LGBT-friendly gig that used to be on Tuesdays in London. And afterwards, the host Simon came up to me and he went, "Those lesbians from Romford, they loved you. I've never seen them laugh so much. Those lesbians, they absolutely adored you. I wonder what it was." And Gina just went, "Well, he is so non-threatening, isn't he?" Which I thought was
Yes, I reckon add an octopus bandana and your non-threatening persona would be totally completed.
But what if it looks like I'm wearing an octopus bandana because I'm trying to hide the fact that I'm bald?
This would still be
Very
quite
difficult with
unthreatening.
I would
bandanas.
say so. I'd say hiding the fact that you're bald is one of the less threatening things to hide.
Oh,
Really?
No, there are some ways that people do it. I don't know. You're right. Well, we'll work out the octopus bandana. I'll tell you what, I'll wear it for the second half of when I see you in Whitley Bay.
Excellent. Good deal. Sorry.
I thought we should have like an introduction now that we are actually live streaming, and a few words of apologies to those who came in mid-flow there. There were some confusing controls involved. Turns out there's a massive go live button. Who knew?
But it's too massive, isn't it?
It could have been massiver.
It's got a massiveness that means it doesn't appear to be a button. It appears to be a world in itself.
Yeah, welcome to Weird Pride Day 2025. It's the 5th Weird Pride Day. It started in 2021. This is a day to celebrate the things that make you weird, especially the less threatening ones. You know, if you come in on that note about threateningness, and you know, I don't necessarily want to encourage people to be proud of all the things that could possibly make them weird. There are some things that perhaps we shouldn't be proud of, and perhaps we should talk about that some point this evening. I'm Fergus Murray. I am chair of AMASE, Autistic Mutual Aid Society Edinburgh. I started Weird Pride Day in 2021. I'm a science educator and writer when I'm not being an autistic community organizer. Perhaps Kate and Robin, you'd like to introduce yourselves as well.
Oh, Robin is He's letting me go first, isn't he? As part of his unthreatening manhood. Let women go first. Obviously, because women do not get enough time to speak. Only 17% of the time in average meetings, he's thinking. So I will go first. Thank you, Robin. Yes, who am I? I'm a stand-up poet and writer and facilitator of creative writing workshops for neurodivergent people, as much and more as possible from now on. I think I found my thing. What else do I do? That seems to be the main things. That's all the things. Is that all I feel like there's something really essential. I'm basically a professional northerner as well.
It's hard, isn't it? Because I've always found nouns difficult. Like I've never called myself a comedian because I think someone will just go, "Well, is he though?" And so I always just end up going, "Well, I just kind of do lots of different things." But yeah. So ADHD found out from the lovely Jamie and Lyon, who some of you may well know, Jamie and Lyon, who basically out of nowhere got in contact with me and said, "Would you like to talk about the neurodivergent model?" And I was 52 years old by then, and everything has changed since. And I kind of write poetry, and I'll go to any library that asks me, generally any bookshop, and I'm on a never-ending tour, which is kind of not a tour. It's just me moving around from place to place.
I have questions now, but that's Fergus's job. Although I used to be a radio journalist, so a little bit of me is doing that. But I mean, that is a huge statement, isn't it? Everything changed. And I know for many of us in the Zoom room, we will have found that on diagnosis or recognizing our neurodivergent identity, everything changed. But yours was kind of given to you by someone who recognized you. I have to say, I'd have recognized you as ADHD within 3 seconds of this conversation, I think, if we hadn't already. But I would have felt awkward about saying, unless we were in a weird Pride event on a Zoom talking about our neurodivergence, in which case it would have been okay, if you see what I mean. But can you say more about everything changed?
It was just, I mean, I wrote a thing the other day about the fact that, like, I write a lot of poetry now. I write about 3 or 4 poems a day, just kind of, I'll see something and then it'll, and like, I think that's a good example, because I think that's the box that used to keep my anxiety in, is now the box where all my creativity is. I mean, I think a lot of people worry. I know people who worry that if they get diagnosed, they'll lose something, especially, creative people. Oh, but if I haven't got this pain. And I've found exactly the opposite. There's a wonderful artist that some of you might know, Robert Rauschenberg. And I remember years ago seeing a quote of his. He says, "Why does our art have to come from our pain? Why can't it come from our joy?" And I think that's one of the things that I found is I used to be anxious from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to bed. No one knew. No one would have known. And that also means that you're more short-tempered and all of those other things. And every single situation is one where your hypervigilance is looking for the threat. So what I think is, one of the big changes for me is all of that energy that went into hypervigilance looking for the threat is now the hypervigilance that is looking for, God, that weird crack in that building. That's really amazing. The flower that's growing out of that. So I think that's kind of, but it was, I can never, there's no way of overestimating how different the last, whatever it is now, 3.5 years of my life have been compared to the first 52 years.
I'm thinking that Jamie wasn't the first to suggest that you were an ADHDer.
Oh no, it happened all the time. It happened every gig I ever did, pretty much. And I would always get people coming up to me, depending on the particular kind of tangents I'd done that day. And someone would either say, "Oh, I'm autistic. I think you're autistic," or "I'm ADHD. You're ADHD." But I think a lot of people have that thing, don't they? Which is, there's a straight. It's not a denial out of. You might know it's Sarah Hendricks, who's that expert in autism, who wrote 4 books about autism, and her 5th book was going to be about what it was like for her as a neurotypical woman to live with an autistic husband. And that was when everyone went, "Oh my God, Sarah, we hadn't realised you thought you were neurotypical." And she'd written 4 books on the subject. And I think that's such a. I know. Everyone has a different, way. Well, not everyone a different way, but there are lots of different ways that you find out. And I think now we're able to find out, because there's so many more examples out there. There's still a tremendous negativity, I think, in the press, but there will be about anything that has progress. I mean, we watched that about everything involving sex, gender, anything which stops being binary is something which the press find repellent. And I think most of us go, what a beautiful thing it is to go, everything is a spectrum.
Yeah, I've never really understood people who are like, oh no, our categories are breaking down, which seems to be a very common response. Like, I get that it makes it harder to talk about things, but apart from that, like, why are people so attached to these things?
What about you, Kate? What was can I ask you, what was, how did you, because to me, it is one of the most important things is it gives you an instruction manual, which I always find ironic because people with ADHD, of course, the first thing that you fail at doing is reading an instruction manual. You get to line 1 and then you go, oh, I'm bored of this, and you make a very bad wardrobe. But that thing of, I wondered what your point where you kind of start to get that instruction manual for your head.
Oh, okay, good question. I think it was a long gap between recognizing that I might be neurodivergent and getting anything like an instruction manual. And the instruction manual came from my fellow neurodivergent activists and speakers, really, once I'd found resources that were not written by neurotypical people or by doctors and psychiatrists in the pathologizing paradigm. But basically, way back in 2004, I was part of an encounter group, a kind of counselling group, because I'd done a counselling course at college, because many, I would say particularly autistic people probably more, will do everything they can to find the rules of this mysterious beings called people, and the rules can be found in psychology and counselling, and maybe we can find out why we're different and how these people work. Anyway, so I was part of a counselling course. The counsellor started counselling autistic parents of autistic kids, and then recognising he himself was probably autistic, and we talked quite a lot. We went through a bit of a discovery process together, but it was 2004. Neither of us really stood a chance of being diagnosed. Him because he was a counsellor, me because I was a woman. But I did start reading books quite early on that were, there's one called Women from Another Planet, edited by Gunilla Gerland. That was huge because that was talking about autism. Oh, which I only looked at for 2 reasons. These are quite niche, I think. One, I struggled with metaphor. Now, that would normally be fine in life, but I'm a poet. And it wasn't that I struggled to do metaphor, it was that I struggled to believe in metaphor. It was a very existential issue that I grappled with. And also I struggle to recognise faces. And now I know that's called prosopagnosia. And I feel okay to say to people, yeah, I'm afraid I don't recognise your face at all, even though we've met 27 times and you're my sister. Sorry, who are you? Type thing. But at the time in 2004, that wasn't. Sorry, this is becoming quite long. In summary, for a long time, I thought I was autistic-ish, as if that's a thing. I don't think it really is a thing. It's a bit more, yeah, or you're right, really. But the discourse moved on a bit. I researched doing a show called Portrait of an Autist as a Young Woman in 2010. Good title, isn't it? That was a good title.
Oh, you might not do metaphors, but your puns are pretty.
Oh, my puns are bang on. But unfortunately, my level of knowledge at the time was, I thought maybe an expert could put those electrodes on my head and tell me whether I was autistic or not, and that would be the climax of the show. That's not how it works. But I did get to meet lots of other autistic people at that point, and it still took another 7 years before I went to the Autism and the Arts Festival at the University of Kent and met autistic women my age who were also performers, who all recognised me immediately, where I was able to go, oh, okay. And I was diagnosed privately, because the NHS still wouldn't do it back then, and probably wouldn't now, in 2017.
Brilliant.
Oh, that was long. As I was saying to some people last night in a self-acceptance workshop I was running through creative writing and reading. So in a way, doing what you're doing, Robin, in a sense, in that some of your self-acceptance is coming through your creative writing and your performing, and I'm getting other people to do that. But true acceptance to me seems to be a process, a long, complicated, ongoing, non-linear, tangential, relational process.
Mm.
Fergus, is it a process for you?
Yeah, for sure. And it's been a long one. You know, I think I probably have an even longer history of wondering if I'm neurodivergent because my mum started getting interested in autism in the 1990s, right at the start of the 1990s. And it took about getting on for 15 years before either of us really started to think of ourselves as autistic. For my mum, it was one of the autistic people she worked with. She sort of said to him, I think autistic people are kind of a bit like cats and normal people like me. And Fergus looked at her like, Fergus doesn't talk, but got the message across very clearly that he didn't really think she was neurotypical. I should say there were problems with the cat dog metaphor, but there's maybe a little something in it.
Well, Kate entirely rejected the cat dog metaphor for it being a metaphor.
Oh, indeed. Yeah. And as I wisely once said, in a way that draws these two binaries together, and that is what we wish to do here, a metaphor can be both a lock and a key. I said that, but in a metaphor, there's a lot going on there. That's like a metaphor. I'll never try to say that ever again. Sorry. Should we talk more about weirdness?
Yeah.
What is that? That's an interesting, because that's something that I got. That I think one of the big changes was not being ashamed or thinking I was a lesser person when people, why you were saying weird things. Like, you know, when I toured with Brian Cox for, you know, which I did for Professor Brian Cox, I've not done Shakespeare with the other one, but it was, he often does say, you know, why are you saying such weird things? That's such a weird thing to say. Everyone thinks you're weird. And I think one of the things that happened once I got the kind of understanding in my mind was that was fine. In fact, I found it more boring, even more boring, the fact that people couldn't keep up with the weird. Because I've always had that from people, except obviously the people that I get on with. You know, so it's never been a problem with. I know Josie Long was hopefully joining us, but I do know why she's not here, and you know, and she's a great ally, you know, in so many different ways, politically and many other things as well. But that bit of, and I remember just, so I would be very, I just like the powers that come with that, things that you're not meant to do, like leave the party and just go and stand in the garden, is something that I can do now. Like, I don't really like parties anyway. I don't like, you know, I don't know about you two, but generally I imagine quite a few people listening to this, if you're in a room with too many voices, it's just nightmarish because you're hearing every single voice and it's a cacophony. And I know that is probably shared by some people out there. And I remember going to my niece's wedding and I'd done the speech and I'd done all that stuff. And then I just saw there was a bench about 500 meters away and I just went and walked out there and just sat there. Quite, but not with any sense, just really happily sat there. And then this lovely thing happened. This 5-year-old, because one of my nieces, she works with a lot of autistic kids. She's done amazing stuff. Again, in that, you know, as we know, there are so many people who just get written off from a very early stage. And towards the end of the wedding, I got chatting to loads of mums who were just saying, "Oh my gosh!" But this 5-year-old just came and just sat down to me in that, you know, just like, "Hello, yep, hello." That's a nice river, isn't it? Yeah, it is a nice river. And we had the most fantastic conversation. And all of those things, which are like a lot of people that I know, like us generally, if you do have to go to a party, you will probably rather do the washing up, play with the children, or take the dog for a walk, because they're all slightly, there's like I always find whenever I visit someone's house, I'll very often be told, I'm so sorry, our dog doesn't normally behave like this, or I'm so sorry, our children aren't normally like this. And I know it's me though, and I always say it's my fault. I bring out the worst, or the, everyone gets overly excitable. Sorry, that was very tangential, but I shouldn't apologize for it, because in the same way you said that, Kate, the idea of having a weird Pride Day in which the answers weren't sometimes extremely long, tangential, or no longer anything to do with the question would mean that we'd failed the test in the first place and should not be here.
I agree. Although I did not find that tangential. I found that very on point, because it is that thing of once you understand yourself, why you're doing certain things, and once you and you've let go of absolutely any sense of this, I shouldn't be doing this, this is abnormal, this is wrong, how liberating that is. And that can come in stages for us, can't it? I caught myself in a moment of weirdness today, because I was thinking, obviously, about Weird Pride Day. And actually, I say I caught myself in it, and it did actually mean that I didn't say the weird thing I was going to say, but I think only because I was thinking about it. So I will. Okay, so I'm in the waiting room of the acupuncturist. Irrelevant detail. First time I've ever been to an acupuncturist. It was amazing. Also irrelevant. Anyway, I'm in the waiting room, and a woman is there with a little baby. And normally I'm scared of babies. In fact, what she was first doing with the baby was breastfeeding the baby. So there was a lot, I thought, visually going on, that I was mostly not looking at. I was like, where do you look? Oh, don't look. Ooh. But they were both dressed in fluffy outfits. They were both furry. I like furry babies because they're more like dogs. And the baby's furry outfit was the same blue as the mother's shoes. And this was really satisfying. And what wanted to come out of me authentically was, oh, your baby matches your shoes. And then I only caught myself. I was like, that is an example of weirdness, isn't it? And I was like, ooh. And I thought I could probably pull that weirdness off quite often because of my persona, because of how I'd say it. But there is a chance I wouldn't have pulled it off necessarily in an acupuncturist's waiting room when the woman had just been breastfeeding. And so I sort of overanalyzed it all and didn't say it, but slightly regretted not saying it, because it was the truest thing I could think of to say. But I do think that would have been thought of as weird, wouldn't it? Probably.
Well, that's sorry, Fergus. I should have, sorry, interrupted.
No, I'm interested in the ways that people get away with being weird or don't. And both of you sort of do comedy and talk to a lot of comedians. In fact, Kate has a PhD in stand-up. Robin, you have a book about comedy. So you've obviously talked to a lot of people who, I'm sure there are obviously tons of reasons why people get into stand-up, right? But one of the things is, I think, being quite weird and needing to find a way of getting away with it, where you can laugh it off. Or
see, it's interesting that, because I think there's I was talking about this with Stuart Lee last night, actually, there's lots of different, like when you break it down, like there's some people, and this is in all arts, but I'll say comedy for the time being, who the real main thing is that they do want to be famous. And those people will never get on, like I probably won't get on as well with them as I would with Josie or Stuart Lee or Joe Neary or whoever it might be, because I know that so I went to Derek Jarman's house recently, and it was amazing. And it was, for those of you who don't know, incredible filmmaker, artist, activist. His house is on Dungeness Beach, where he created a garden out of the most barren kind of area. And I loved his house. Not only because it was like a shrine to me, because I was quite young when I first found his work, and I'd love his diaries and I love his work, but also because you could tell that this was a house that was just filled with perpetual creativity. Oh, I found this hagstone. How can I make this into something? Oh God, that's a new color of paint. I haven't really had. Oh, I'm going to turn that into that painting over there, and I'm going to splash that there, and I need to mark that book there. And I think that's one thing that unites a certain form of creative person, which is, you do it because you must. because I remember when lockdown started, I had a headache for about 5 days, and then I wrote a really long thing, and the headache went. And to me, it was like there's a pressure of going, but I need to make so. And then I found a way of making stuff every single day and spending most of the day. And I don't know if you two, that sense of, and I do think that some comedians, rather than being weird, what comedy allows them to be is to be normal, because they go, hey, don't we all do this? Hey, don't we all do that? And they all in the dressing room, the green room, or whatever, they all have nicknames that are like the kind of nicknames a footballer would have. So there's that other side of it, which is, yes, you were bullied at school, but now you've found the way of being the bully. So I think it's, it's quite, I would say, Kate as well, having, seen her work, and I get a sense of, the necessity of creativity. And I think that's one of the big divides in people. And that's also where all the love comes from, because you're filled with, just the excitement. And that's when you'll then get told off. When I was working on the book that I've just finished, I noticed how often, in particular, autistic people would apologize at some point for talking for too long. And I would always say, no, but it's really interesting. And it reminded me that for, a lot of us, we've been told to calm down a lot, because part of what is weird, and how strange that this should be weird, is to be passionate. And certainly a lot in the same way, I don't know if either of you would agree with this, which is, sorry, by the way, I've eaten loads of little white milk bottles and had 2 coffees together, so it's a disaster. But banter, I don't see very much banter when a bunch of neurodivergent people are around. That I see lots of joking about, lots of being silly, lots of passion. It's not in any way a bland or but I don't see, and I might be, I'm sure there's different groups, but in the groups that I've hung around in, there's a real sense of camaraderie and a real sense of, why would you want to win a conversation when we could just all have, and isn't that odd? But that's weird to not, if you see low hanging fruit of a way of taking the piss out of someone, the fact that your brain does not go there, that strangely enough is actually weird.
There's so much there, so much there. I want to say that I tortured myself, though, for years, and it's a very specific form of self-torture, by trying to fit into comedy as a every woman comedian, despite being palpably, through every note of my being, weird. And part of the reason I did that was sociological and geographical. I wasn't trying to be a comedian in London, where there are audiences for quirky, weird, literate humour. I was trying to do it in South Shields and Whitley Bay and Newcastle and Washington, not DC. And Robin has disappeared, but I'll carry on. And that meant it was like a terrible, like, we know, many of us on this Zoom, we know the traumatic effects of masking, how difficult that can be. I decided I would do my masking on stage in front of like 100 people at a time. And I don't think that was very good for me. And sometimes my body would go, Kate, you have to stop doing this. And I would lose my voice, or I would sprain my wrist, or I'm surprised that, I didn't like break my leg on my way to every comedy venue that I tried to go and painfully mask at. But then luckily, eventually I discovered poetry, and it was sort of all fine in the end. But I had to do a PhD about it to recover from the trauma. And I love what Robin has just said about banter, and that not being, that's not a common neurodivergent thing, is it?
No, it's a really interesting difference. And yeah, the thing about passion, right? The fact that society at large sees passion as weird, and we have this very kind of split-brained approach to passionate people, where capitalism very much like celebrates and lionizes people who are heroically passionate and pursue their dreams. but at the same time, actually really kind of craps on people who do that constantly until they actually, you know, achieve their dreams in a kind of money-making sense.
Their dreams have to be ideally vertical dreams, don't they? Like climb a mountain, that's good. Create a pile of money, that's good. But don't explore mushrooms or know every single name of every Doctor Who villain or hero. That is seen as less useful, I don't know why, to neoliberal capitalism. Who knew? Which is why we're a revolutionary force once we're out and talking, because we're kind of resistant to the main cultural values, aren't we? The normative cultural values around what we should value, which is why Weird Pride is subtly subversive.
Yeah.
And
although, of course, capitalism keeps on coming back to the well of weirdos being creative. You know, the whole kind of gentrification cycle is basically about a bunch of weird people move into a neighborhood and do weird creative stuff. And that draws in money. And then the money drives out the creative people and replaces it with people who can afford to live there.
Absolutely. And that's probably happened in tech world as well, hasn't it? In a very complex way. Let's not think about Elon Musk today. Let's, I don't know. But there is a sense in which tech world, yay, weird, passionate geeks. Now, I don't know. Elon Musk. Sorry, I've got stuck on Elon Musk. Help! Someone unstick me. I know, KB. Let's just not think about him. I know.
I've been thinking about Bill Gates lately, who is at least as much of a weirdo as Elon Musk, and who I've spent most of my life kind of detesting because I dislike Microsoft products, and he's had a monopoly on operating systems, and that seems bad. But now I can see that actually Bill Gates was only ever moderately bad. He's basically a nice guy. He just happened to make billions.
He was trying to cure malaria and stuff, I suppose. Can we go to Jez's comment, which I think is really interesting? I just saw it in the chat. Anybody ever think about the overlap between being weird and the uncanny valley?
Ooh, yes, that's a good one, isn't it? I feel like haven't you written about this, Kate?
Joanne Lindbergh has written a brilliant essay about this that was in the London Review of Books, I think, that was about that, where people sense something slightly off in your being or persona that's an uncanny valley effect. And in fact, going back to the waiting room and the mum and the baby and the furry baby and the matching baby and the shoes, that would have elicited an uncanny valley effect because as a woman, what you are supposed to do when you encounter a baby, first, you have to say, that's a lovely baby, or how much did it weigh when it came out of you? See, something like, you know, but not in a weird way. See,
as opposed to, doesn't that match your shoes nicely?
Exactly. So it would have done the uncanny valley effect. Welcome back, Robin. We were just talking about, so Jez had earlier up in the thread said, has anyone talked about the link between the uncanny valley effect and weirdness?
Is that because I've not read? I'd love to read that article by Joanne Lindbergh. I'll find that, because that uncanny. So do you mean that there's a similar sense in the same way that you feel slightly nauseous when you see something that's just a little bit too human but not human? So in a dialogue, again, I suppose I find it interesting because I can't kind of work that out because it's never been an experience I've had. Because the joy when someone says something that is weird is, well, first of all, it's not weird, is it? It's the moment of, so it's a very different. So I find that it's a very interesting idea that that's what goes on when people go. I mean, I definitely think you might be right about that sense of, a bit like if you're doing a gig and a lot of people are really getting you, and some people who are perhaps the most mainstream people, they're not. They feel tremendously alienated and angry because they are so used to feeling that they understand what's going on due to the very limited number of options in existence, that when you throw those alternatives out there, it's just, yeah, I find that's very interesting, that uncanny valley thing. Whoever brought that up, sorry, I didn't hear that, but yeah,
Yeah, Jez
really
in chat, and then they've added, I've felt some people getting uncanny valley from me, so I think it's when you're weird but not weird enough. And then Gideon says, uncanny valley is something that's very close to human, but not quite, and gives you an uncanny feel, like some dolls or some robots, etc.
Yeah,
yeah,
and I think it's quite a common thing for neurodivergent people, I guess especially autistic people, to kind of fall into that, where people like feel like something is off in a way that they can't put their finger on. And yeah, kind of leads to being seen as not really fully human.
Although can contain the joy and the love. And actually, so the etymology of weird is more from uncanny. It means, I mean, originally it related to apparently the fates, the three fates, and it means speaking of the gods. But it basically means uncanny stuff, essentially. So weird was always that. Although the connection with fate is really interesting, but in a way that I can't articulate yet. There's something there. But
So the word weird comes into modern English via Shakespeare. The witches in Macbeth were the Weirds, the Weird sisters, and the Weirds were the Fates. So they were the Fates. And interestingly, one of Shakespeare's like obvious source materials, which he heavily plagiarized and changed details, really described them as fairies rather than witches. In fact, the whole kind of witchiness, a lot of that's been put onto Macbeth later. Yeah, so the idea of weirdness, yeah, it was always tied up in magic. The weird people are a bit like witches or maybe fairies. And I think there's
go on.
Oh, there's something in there about like magic and defying expectations and the possibilities of not being, not conforming to expected things.
See, that's what I love Alan Moore, is because Alan, I think, is, and also Melinda Gebbie, who he did Lost Girls with, and you look at the way that their minds work, and they have that kind of William Blake thing, which is to say, here is the ground-based reality, which is roughly the same for everyone. We have our, what we might call reality number one. And then, with people like Blake and I think Melinda and Alan, so you get these other levels of reality, which are only your reality, but it doesn't stop it being real. If you see what I mean. So you don't have to persuade. I always use that example of when William Blake was arguing with a thistle in a field that had become an old man who he didn't get on with. Now, for him, that thistle was most definitely an old man. But also he knew that thistle, for everyone who's walking past him, was most definitely a thistle. And that bit of having those, because I think, again, this goes back to the spectrum of what the non-weird society wants is a binary yes, no, is not anything which to them confuses. So there's no confusion. It's like if you watch Piers Morgan, and I do not advise anyone to do that, but one of the common questions he will say is, but do you condemn this? Because that's a binary. It doesn't, and you get these people who will always be saying, no, but we need to put no, but do you? Because that's how our discourse is. And I think that kind of plays into, again, that sense of to be weird is, I mean, sorry, I'm rambling even worse than normal, but it was, but it is that, because I was thinking that something which I think is quite common amongst most of the neurodivergent people that I know and that I've spoken to, and is I realised that people who are not neurodivergent or don't seem to be, they don't spend the whole time going, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? Why is that person doing this? Why is that going on? Why am I described as like I found it interesting. This is something that I realized was I don't use he, him on any of my account stuff. It's not because I'm against that, but even that to me is a level of certainty that is too great. but I wouldn't want to put they, them, because I would then feel that I would be taking that away from people whose they, themness. Do you know? And it's been much easier to look at all of these different things, like when I was saying earlier on about my difficulty with nouns. Anything which says this is it is like me going, oh no, but, and I found that really interesting, knowing that, you know, for one of the things that makes probably many people watching this now very tired is the fact that you can't just walk through. You have to keep going. But why is that going on, and why is that? And then hopefully for a lot of people, as I've found, there is a greater freedom once you understand that that's the way those people need to work. And that though we will still be going, why am I doing that? Why am I doing that? We don't have to beat ourselves up for failing to just slip straight into that stream of normality.
I feel like I was hearing, maybe Robin as well, in the uncertainty, in the difficulty of using he, him because it feels too uncertain. That's also about your relationship to words and to language, isn't it? And as to how reliable they are as a means of conveying probably multi-sensory, people are saying in chat, kaleidoscopes and constellations of experience rather than a spectrum. And I find that once you kind of start that relationship to language that some people don't question at all, and they're just like, words are the world. And that's all there is to it, which is ever such a comfortable position to have. But for a lot of us, it's very difficult to just be okay with that. So that seems, I've been really struck in my writing courses again recently, how people are they're quite distrustful of words, but are still going to grapple with them anyway. They're like, words have let me down. They don't say the thing. I am a multiple sensory tangential being, and this word is trying to just say a thing in a line, but I'm going to give it a go. Helen has said in chat, I love words. And of course, there's the joy of words. You know, in our bodies, this is my favourite weird fact, we have 38 trillion, oh, no, I'm not going to question myself, 38 trillion bacteria cells, approximately, and only 30 trillion-ish, give or take, one or two, human cells. And the anthropologist and philosopher Timothy Morton says that even those bacteria are part of us, they are not, they're inextricable. We regard them as strange.
Definitely moving in this direction. But I don't need to keep moving in that direction.
And we've got Helen in the chat, Helen Edgar of Autistic Realms. I'm just going to draw people's attention to this. They've just created a 300+ page book of weird words related to monotropism and being monotropic. So that's super meta monotropism. I would encourage anyone who hasn't already to check out Autistic Realms via Facebook and other means. Something's going on in chat where people are loving the word gazebo as well. I'm just noting that.
It is a very good word, gazebo.
Good word.
I find it, I like to try and crowbar in chutzpah as well. I love that. I think chutzpah really, yeah, it gives you that sense of if you can say of someone, oh, they've really got chutzpah, haven't they? You just think, oh yeah, that's a great thing to be filled with.
Another thing someone brought up in the chat is weird fiction, which I'm fascinated by the relationship between different sorts of weirdness. So are people who are weird more likely to be drawn to weird fiction, to weird music, for example, to the weirdness of the world? I mean, I was listening to a podcast with you on recently, Robin, which is all about weirdness, and it's about the kind of weirdness that is often told in weird fiction. So, you know, the kind of things like ghosts and mysterious phenomena. And I've got things to say about how those relate to what we were saying about the sort of porousness of the self, and what is me? I feel like a lot of this stuff connects because a lot of it is to do with the kind of the bits of people that they don't think about very much, you know, unless we think that it's an objective feature of the world that there are ghosts and so on, which I don't think there are. I think in some sense there are.
I think again that's that space of the once you can start accepting that the mind is where the world is. Because I've talked about this lots in the past, but I used to argue with Brian Cox. If I brought up ghosts, he would always say, "But they break the second law of thermodynamics, so they don't exist." And again, that's like this kind of binary answer. But the interesting answer is that they do definitely exist in our imagination. We can all have a sense of someone that we've lost. We can find them in different places. And I think, again, that restrictive thing, which says, does this exist, yes or no? I think then probably does lead to some people believing things which are a little bit more, sometimes some of the fanciful beliefs can lead to darker areas. Whereas if, again, having this kind of, here is my reality, when I experience the ghost of my mother or my father, I know that it's not in the room for anyone else. It's in the room because of the things that have been triggered, because of the book that I've seen or the piece of music that I've heard. And again, I think that's where it seems a lot of the things that we come back to on the weird are, again, those bits which are chipping away at saying that the limitations of rules of society are what means it's not. I mean, certainly I started loving horror films when I was 8 years old. I bought my first horror movie book, Alan Frank's horror movies. I was obsessed by them. I'd seen very few of them, but I would just look at the pictures over and over again and read all the stories and the Pan Book of Horror. And now I think it's like also what I love about things like David Lynch films is I never, people go, but what's it all mean? And I don't care. I want to enjoy the ride, and I can enjoy the ride. And again, I find that with a greater understanding, I don't get hung up on going, but what's it mean? Because to get an answer, a bit like the revelation of the monster is very often disappointing, isn't it? Because it's never quite fulfills, even though we've not been able to picture it exactly, there is an emotional sense in us of what this monster will be. And when we actually see whatever it might be, latex or CGI, it's like,
It kind of shuts down the weirdness, doesn't it?
Yeah.
As long as you haven't seen it, you don't actually know what it looks like. There's a sense of possibility there. There's like a slight uncanniness. Ooh, like, again,
that could be the start of a remake of Roald Dahl's ghost stories there. You going, woo, Fergus, just that is how we go into the ghost stories. See, it's interesting because that I feel like, because I can't watch a lot of horror nowadays because I feel it too viscerally. Although I used to enjoy more horror when I was little and growing up. I love that position of kind of recognizing that what you see might not be what someone else is experiencing, and being able to have that acceptance. That's your world, this is mine. And I suppose, as we know, often the rest of the world is not always as accepting, and that can be difficult because we just want people to go, oh, I accept that's your world. I do think, and again, Helen has just been noting this in the chat, and I very much agree, given that a lot of neurodivergent perception is multisensory and is often sensing energy in different ways and is doing bottom-up processing, which means we're getting information first from our senses, first from the physical, first from energy. Sometimes things that people call mystical and spiritual, like it's just different ways of knowing and processing energy and information that currently get completely dismissed. I mean, telepathy, for example, of course, telepathy in a form happens, like it happens all the time. I don't need to fight for the existence of something that is kind of telepathic-ish. And it's very frustrating that it's just, it's mystical. It's other. Oh, it's so frustrating. Anyway, it's another way in which neurodivergent experience is erased, I would say.
I think you're right. Again, it narrows it down again to one thing or the other. It's like I had an experience when I was at a stone circle in the Outer Hebrides, and it was quite often. I mean, most days now there's something which is almost a transcendent moment, you know, again, where all that anxiety used to be stored up. And I just see something, and it might be something that other people might think is banal. Again, going back to something in a wall or something in a reflection or whatever. But in the stones, it was the stones of Kaleidoscopic. I just remember feeling such a sense of all the things that had happened there before in the previous 6,000 years and what might happen afterwards. And I thought afterwards, I think what I experienced is what some people would call God. But for me, was a bodily experience made up of imagination, made up of reading, made up of just, and it was wonderful and joyous. And what a pity it is if we just turn it into this, oh, I know what that was. It was that clever man who made, you know, whatever. And I know that's not everyone's religion. I want to make that, or faith. I find faith very interesting. I find religion very boring. But I think, you know, that there are those moments again which allow us to not have to go. We need to have, there's points we do need a shared reality. You know, by the edge of the cliff, we need a shared reality. But in a lot of other areas, I think the diversity of what we are experiencing at any one time, and I think that's where so many people have been, you know, in agony for so much of their life, is because they're having to play the part of having the normal reaction and not revealing the diversity of the sense of their experience.
Yeah. Really, the root of neurodiversity, I think, the fundamental fact is that different people experience things really differently. And that's it, like, it seems kind of obvious to me, but that's probably because I've been experiencing things differently from everyone around me for like big chunks of my life. And yeah, so that recognition that other people have very different experiences is very relevant to things like how people talk about faith and religion, right? And ghosts and whatnot. Because I think when I was younger, I was quite invested in a sort of rational, empirical understanding of the world. You know, I studied physics and philosophy. I wanted to know objectively how the world worked as far as possible. I spent quite a lot of time arguing with religious people on the internet. And eventually I came to understand that it's not really about that, right? It's like, in a lot of ways, it doesn't matter what it is about something which is bringing someone a sense of joy and satisfaction and meaning, as long as it's not also causing them to behave terribly, which does happen.
Well, that was the thing I always used to say about as the atheist movement kind of in its second boom or whatever boom it was went on. I said, I think it'd be much better if it wasn't about religion. It was about bigotry and certainty, because then you don't have to go, oh, well, Stalin was an atheist though, because you go, no, but Stalin was Stalinism, and that had this definite truth around this, you know, so many punishing and, you know, and I think that's interesting. I don't think it's, I think, you know, religion as an organization, that's when you go, oh, now I know why they've brought in these rules. Faith, again, if we were able to go, it's what I love about, I'm a big fan of the Quakers, right? I'm sure someone's got a bad Quaker story, but I like the Quakers and I like the Unitarians. And because there's a freedom of what you believe, there is a freedom to say, let's all gather together and let's all work towards peace and love and delight and joy and help people around us. But that doesn't mean that we also have to have this kind of, you know, the documents that say, and these are the people that it's necessary to hate.
Here, and I've just had an article published. Like, I never write articles for free or very much, or unless someone asks me to. I've just written one for the Friends Journal, the Quaker Journal in America, because I saw they were doing a neurodiversity issue, and I find Quaker meetings the best place for neurodivergent unmasking. It's so quiet and peaceful, but you're all kind of tuning into each other, and you don't have to believe in God or not God. It's like the Lib Dems of religion, but better in every possible way. And the Humanist Society, they didn't want the retired vicar who is in our Quaker meeting because he might not be sufficiently atheist. Whereas the Quakers are like, crack on, uncertain vicar, in you come. And you have a room full of neurodivergent people. Sorry, I didn't mean this to be an advert for the Quakers. Did you know the Quakers' new slogan, which is really cool, is simple, radical, spiritual. And it's just in white letters on a red background. And it's like, yeah, that. Anyway.
I would recommend anyone who's going to London and they're looking for somewhere to go and have a sandwich, just opposite Euston Station is the Quaker Cafe. And it's a lovely place to hang out.
That's sort of where
And
I got together with Sunny, my partner.
oh, brilliant. I love that cafe. It's always, and I always bump into someone there, and I always end up having, when I say a strange conversation, I mean the correct strange conversation. I mean, we don't talk about the fact that it has got a little bit warmer today, hasn't it? We get straight on to the nuts and bolts of philosophical agonies and existential existence.
I recently read
the new
Oliver
movie with Nicolas
Postgate's.
Cage.
Sorry.
I
I recently read Oliver Postgate's autobiography, Seeing Things. He's the guy who created Bagpuss. And I won't say he was definitely autistic, but I will say that his entire autobiography is intensely relatable to me as an autistic person. And he had a very long-running relationship with the Quakers, where I think his wife was very, very heavily involved. And he just didn't believe in God. He was never religious at all, but he ended up going to lots of Quaker meetings. Yeah, they would regularly invite him to talk about peace and disarmament and such.
Well, all that kindness in his work is, and again, the uncanniness. Nog in the nog and nog bad the bad. All of that, a slightly uncanny voice, him and Peter Firmin. And I remember reading, you'll have read about it in the book. I think it's in the book as far as I remember. He started an organization to buy up all the poppy crops from Afghanistan because he found out that what was happening was the Americans, every time they came across a place that was, ultimately that was going to go to the heroin trade, they would just destroy it. But that then just leaves a bunch of farmers in poverty. So he found a way of selling it all for medical opiates. And the fact that, he's doing that and he's creating those, Bagpuss is a beautiful ghostly piece of work. Even Ivor the Engine is surprisingly, and I love that moment where there are certain people whose humanity, you just know that if you met them, they would be as humane and as wonderful.
And yeah, there's something in there, isn't there, about having divergent experiences, seeing the world differently from people around you, and wanting to urgently get across to the rest of the world that they're missing a lot of things, including how differently other people experience it.
Yeah.
And I think that shows up in quite a lot of writers and artists' work.
So there is that tension. So at least if you're an artist or a creative of some sort, you kind of basically do have license to go, look, the world is more weird than you ever thought here, and open it up. And actually that strand of joyousness that I've always known to run through your work, Robin, and through Josie's work, it is that kind of weird joyousness, and Oliver Postgate. But there is the other side of it that I definitely sometimes have. I want to share the weird joy, but it's also really frustrating that other people don't get it. I want to go around to everyone's house individually and go, why aren't you more tolerant? It is 100% the right thing to be tolerant. I am certain of this. Oh, hang on. Do you know what I mean? It's frustrating.
But also it's frustrating because there are loads of people who, if we had, say, a media landscape where there were artists who were, more creative, left field and strange and weird, they will like it if they actually find it. There's nothing that I like more about doing, because sometimes when I do gigs, people only know me from maybe Radio 4 from doing a science show. And then suddenly I'm doing poetry or punching a melon and singing Mustang Sally. And you find out that very often people go, well, this is not what I was expecting at all. But I've actually had and I think that's all the time. One of the fights we should all have in terms of for our creativity and for the creativity of those people and things that we love is to say to people, honestly, come and have a look at this, because I think you might really, there's nothing more joyous, is there, than taking someone goes, oh, I really wasn't, oh, this doesn't look like my cup of tea at all, but I've had a lovely time. That's out there all the time. And I think that's part of our fight, because that's the thing, isn't it? That if you've never believed that you already know that there can't just be a single way of thinking. because you know about the way you think, and then you find someone else who thinks in some other, sometimes it might be similar to you, sometimes it might be quite different, but you know it's, and that bit of removing the exterior it's something that I bang on about a lot, which is the greater the disparity between who you appear to be and who you believe you are on the inside is the greater your terrible unhappiness, and that very often the unhappiness of people around you. But that and that bit sometimes where you might reveal yourself and someone's a bit of an arsehole about it, and what you have to do is say, I am not wrong. It's just that that person is not for me. And I should, because I know a lot of people, especially people who, when they've begun to, find a diagnosis by whatever means and whatever age they are, they've realised that they've been hanging around with people who they shouldn't have been, who have been so bad for them, because they've always looked for their weakness. And it turns out that their weakness is this magnificent strength when you put it in an area which is far less judgmental and far more passionate.
The quiet wisdom of weirdness. That's what I'm hearing there. Like that.
I should possibly point out that it is 6:36. Robert, I think you said you need to go by about 7.
Oh yeah, I've got to go late and buzzard.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I'm not in a rush to wrap this up, but I thought we should keep an eye on the time.
Yes.
What you were saying there, Robin, made me think about what a tragedy it is that Josie Long's shortcuts is being cut Radio 4. It's a deeply weird bit of radio. Every time they get a collection of usually individually quite weird clips and shove them together to make an even weirder whole, which is just beautiful, and it's all kinds of things which people wouldn't listen to, and people who wouldn't be listened to, right? Like, it's a lot of things made by people who are not radio professionals.
I'm tremendously cross about it, because I think that a voice like Josie's, first of all, even at the very starting point, is it's a rare voice within the media. And I think, exactly as you said, this was this one period of time in radio where there were those voices who we might hear on nothing else ever again, but for those little stories that we hear, those anecdotes, whatever, the chance that they connect with people who have not found a connection anywhere else. And I have absolutely no idea why they've got rid of it, because there was outrage, because people really, really love it. Why get rid of that whole, oh yeah, but we need to be, more up to date? Well, it's not as if, Josie's archaic or anything like that. Yeah, I think I mean, that's what, it's why I think live is so important. I was playing a library in West Kirby on Saturday morning, and, most of it was kind of pensioners, and then there were some younger people there as well. And it's so nice because lots of them are there just because they go, oh, it's a library event, we'll come along. And then you end up talking about stuff, and you see the connections that can happen in that room. Like, I wrote a poem a while ago about, there's a wonderful actor called Colin Jevon. Some of you will know. If any of you are Jeremy Brett Sherlock Holmes fans, you'll know him as Lestrade. He was the MC in the final episode, Restaurant at the End of the Universe episode, and the TV version of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, House of Cards. And he's 95, and he was telling me a story about how when he was 8, he wrote a story in school, and the teacher brought him to the front of the class and said, you did not write this story, you must have copied it out from a book, because she didn't believe in his imagination. And he said to me, and from that point onwards, I knew you had to be very careful about your imagination. And I saw, 95 years old, 87 years ago, but I could see in his eyes what that meant. And it was really interesting, because I've only read it out a few times in a few shows, but in particular in that room in West Kirby, I got the sense of the number of people who have that in them, who have that story. And I had such beautiful conversations with these lovely, and that's what Shortcuts was there for. And that is why all of us, any of us who have any platform at all, however small, however big, whatever, to go out there and not kowtow to what we think the mainstream is. You know, I think for a long period of time, the show that I did start by punching a melon with Vernon Kay's face drawn on it and then breaking into Mustang Sally, was a lot of it was actually about the fact that there was a period of time where I was trying to turn myself into the shape I thought you were meant to be successful. And then that, of course, branches out much wider, that how many of us are trying to distort our bodies into the shape of what we think it's meant to be. And that might be very literally, or that might be, you know, sorry, Kate, metaphorically, I apologize for that. But that is, you know, I feel very, again, I suppose because I've carried it with me for 52 years and now I don't have it. I do feel this tremendous, you know, the desire. Robin Williams was right as well in that beautiful thing, the way he talked about the fact that certain performers, comedians, whatever, one of the reasons they want to make people happier is because they know what it's like not to be happy. And I think if you are very lucky and you manage to actually find happiness and you can still go out there and try and make other people happy and accepting of themselves, it's the most exciting thing. And again, we're kind of told off because that would be like kind of, ooh, well, look at that, a bit highfalutin. Where, you know, it's like you're not, you know, if you do talk about things you love, like I went to see Inside Number 9, the play, the other day, and it was brilliant. And I sent a message to Reese, and I saw him afterwards, and I said how brilliant I thought it was. And then I felt apologetic. The next day, I texted him. I said, just so you know, I really did love it as much as that. And I never pretend to be effusive, but I was a bit worried that I was so effusive that you might have thought, he seems too effusive. And that's because it is an alien thing, isn't it? The moment you see someone, the first thing I want to do is find the thing that I can say that I loved about their work or that it was brilliant or beautiful. Or I just leave the room immediately because I know that they've appeared on GB News. It's one or the other.
As I was saying to someone on a Facebook thread this morning when they were saying, well, what can we do? Everything is scary, everything is anxiety provoking. And I was saying, well, not everything is though, and lots of things are still joyful, and joy is a form of resistance. Joy is a really effective form of resistance to all sorts of power structures. It's very leaky and messy and insidious and seepy in a good way and contagious, as you've just been saying. And yeah, more of
especially joy in weird stuff, right? Joy in things which are seen as out there, that like not everybody is going to take joy in. You know, taking joy in the oddities of gender and the strangeness of certain kinds of brain and minority experiences, because at the moment we are living under regimes which are trying to shut down that stuff, and it's really important to joyously resist that.
Oh yeah, and I think in particular, you know, if you're kind of a predominantly straight white guy, and you're not shouting every time you see things that, whether it's about the oppression of trans people, of cis women, or whatever it might be, if you're not joining in that battle against that, don't get worried about going, oh, I don't want to look kind of woke or whatever, because it's. I was going to mention in terms of joy, Kate, have you come across Alexis Pauline Gumbs?
no.
Wonderful poet from America. And she wrote a book called Undrowned: Black Feminist Lessons from Marine Mammals. And that's exactly what it is. And it is a book that I bang on about. So Mari from the wonderful Lighthouse Bookshop in Edinburgh. You know the Lighthouse Bookshop. You're in Edinburgh, aren't you, folks? Yeah.
And I've gigged there a few times.
That's the last place I saw Kate.
Oh,
yes, doing my show. Bigger on the inside, spreading artistic joy.
Make sure if next time you're there, get a copy of that book if you've not got it, because one of the things that I love about Alexis as well, and she's written an amazing book about Audre Lorde as well, which you go, I've got to stop underlining all my favorite sentences because I've just underlined the whole book. I'll just underline the occasional 4 words I don't want to return to. But I look at what she's putting up now, And as you know, as a queer black woman in America, you think of the things that, and one of the things that she's doing is joy. She is both being very powerfully resistant of the narrative that is being sold to people, but she's also the smile on her face, that one that says, you will not take away the joy that I am going to also still find in this world. But yeah, anyone watching this, Alexis Pauline Gums is the first time we actually finally met. She said, just so you know, when I was writing Undrowned, Black Feminist Lessons from Marine Mammals, it was never your face that I imagined as one of the likely readers. And again, I think that's quite an important thing. We should always be reading books where people go, why are you reading that book? That doesn't seem, you don't want to read a book about, anyway, blah, blah, blah. Sorry.
Oh, no, huge thank you for the recommendation. I feel like I'm so glad to know of that book now, because I've been looking at the links between neurodiversity and biodiversity, which is like a completely unsurprising thing to do because the concept came from biodiversity, but people have sort of forgotten the link somehow, and they're totally on board with, we definitely need loads of different types of trees and loads of different types of marine mammal, but less still on board with, we need loads of different types of human, so you have to go the other way. And all the poets that I found that were writing in the area of creaturely writing, or writing from others, writing from animals, all neurodivergent, basically. Again, it's almost something about that empathy, that ability to step into it, really step into the role of another that feels powerful. So I find myself really wanting to talk about AI now. I probably shouldn't, should I? It's bringing me a lot of joy in a weird way, in a niche weird way. I only use ethical AI. I do. I talk to Claude from Anthropic a lot, and there's no one more accepting of weirdness or a better conduit for weirdness than talking to an LLM. And I think, optimistically, the world is going to get more weird the more people interact with LLMs, not in the mainstream chat GPT sort of way, but in the weird way. And can I just draw everyone's attention to the fact that in Chile in 1972, a man called Stafford Beer was instrumental in setting up Project Sin, an amazing, what would have been a socialist internet system. And there's still time to do that with AI, if only we would crack on with it. But mostly a lot of weird people are just annoyed about AI. I'm just throwing that out there.
I was wondering if you could react a
on
little bit more, while we were on the topic of books.
Jamie's
I'd like to know more about your book, the one which is coming out soon on the topic of weirdness.
Oh, me?
Yeah. You.
Oh,
yes,
okay.
We've diverted from my topic immediately, Robin, onto your book. Yes.
Normally weird, weirdly normal it was a weird, but it took a long time to write actually, because by my standards, because I'd forgotten. I thought, I think I started writing it, and then I found I'd written 50,000 words, and so I just got rid of them all because I thought I don't really even remember writing all those. And then at one point I really, really, really wanted to write it properly ADHD style, but the publisher were like, no. And at that point, I nearly threw all my toys out the pram. There was a bit of a meltdown because I found it kind of interesting. And I don't know if other people watching this have found this, which is very often books that are looking at neurodivergency are then turned into very neurotypical books in their structure and the way that they're made. And I understand that in one way because we're trying to get other people to understand. But I would love to play around. I mean, in poetry, of course, Kate, you can play around more with that. But that moment you get to a kind of, normal prose. But yeah, so it is the story of, I kind of look at lots of different trauma, and then I go through basically different incidents in my life and use them as the jumping off point to then talk to loads of autistic people, ADHD people, dyslexic, and just and it was really hard to do because I've got like about 1 million words of interview, because there was, and I spoke to so many fantastic people and learned so much all the time. I mean, that was the great thing, was every conversation there would be something. Either sometimes I'd go, oh, I hadn't realized that's why that happens here, or experiences that I don't have at all in my own form of neurodivergence. And I think it's made it easier and easier every time that I'm in a room to understand sometimes why people are doing certain things that they're doing, and that they're not doing them to be annoying, and they're not doing, and that bit of being able just to sail through in a way of going, yeah, this is fine. This is, and then every now and again where you might have a sudden feeling of going, oh, I need to stop actually there because I'm not quite sure where this has gone. And I wonder if I can ask that, I think as long as if you are able to speak to people without any agenda beyond the agenda of wanting to speak to someone, then, but there are so many different agendas that get thrown in all the time. And I definitely found by talking to so many people. But yeah, so it's basically, I hope I've had the first few people who I was really pleased. Chris Packham was an early reader, and I'm glad that he found a lot of stuff of it. But the most exciting thing is, right, I've got a quote from Robert Smith from The Cure. That is, for me, it's like I couldn't believe it when a couple of years ago I found out that Robert Smith had read some of my books, because he's Robert Smith from The Cure. And I always find that funny. It's like finding out that Patti Smith is a fan of Midsummer Murders. Because you go, no, Patti Smith must just be watching documentaries about Robert Mapplethorpe all the time and experimental movies by Kenneth Anger. She can't be watching John Nettles fighting some black magic nuns, and Laurie Anderson finding out that she's an enormous fan of the Martin Clunes comedy drama Doc Martin. All of these things are wonderful. But yeah, so that was. But no, I mean, it's the most scared I've ever been about a book, because I want it. I really, really, really want people to find themselves in it. And I really want, and it's that bit where, and it's a bit like with the shows that I do now, each year it becomes more and more important that they really connect with people on a level beyond we had a night out. And if they don't, then I know it's kind of failed. That it doesn't, I might, if it's, I remember, like, I don't know, 15 years ago, whatever, I suddenly found I sometimes look in a notebook and I go, that's just a joke. It's just a joke. That's a joke. And it's not that I'm against jokes. There are people who do them brilliantly, but I wanted to do something different. And that's how I feel about the book, which is, I think that I know a few booksellers have read it as well, because they get kind of early copies. And I've, again, been pleased every time that I see someone saying, I felt seen. And I'm sure both of you have had that experience where someone listens to you at something and they come up to you and they say, I felt seen today. And that is, and it's so interesting again, where, just quickly going back in terms of thinking about the trans stuff as well, we're on two separate accounts. Like recently I was doing an event, and I try as much as possible, again, because I'm an old, middle-class white guy from Radio 4, I think it's quite important to talk about some of those issues that people might, and this old woman came up to me and she said, I was very worried when you started talking about trans people. And I thought, because we've also been told that, yeah. And she said, because my granddaughter's trans. And then it was all fine. And I was so relieved. And it's like that realization that even just in a positive way, accepting the existence of people it's, because again, our media is so restrictive in it's I mean, what you've got, the Guardian is our most left-wing newspaper, and is frequently reactionary, and is frequently, and when Jeremy Corbyn was there, they went, well, we've always liked the idea of a left-wing government, but I think this one's gone a bit too far, so we'll be voting Lib Dem, and it's like that thing where you just go, well, that's, and then they can, and so I think, again, going back to that, the weirdness, every time one of us feels comfortable enough to be publicly weird, there is more than likely, like, I'll use another example. This is not about weirdness, but it's one of my favorite stories of my lovely friend Grace Petrie, the great folk singer and activist, where Josie Long and Grace and me, we just did a little tour together because we weren't up to much, and we just went, hey, why don't we go out on the road for a couple of months? We had a lovely time. And one night there was a woman in the audience who looked really sad and miserable, and we were a bit worried about her. We didn't want to pick on her. We were worried. And then Grace played the same venue a year later, and it turned out that woman had left her a letter. And the letter was, I came out to see you and Robin and Josie. on a night that I probably shouldn't have done because I was feeling really down and I didn't really know what was going on in my life. And she said, and then I watched you and I just went, oh yeah, I'm a lesbian, aren't I? Why am I going out with that bloke? And obviously she knew all that, but to see someone as powerful and brilliant as Grace on stage, and that in all of those different weirdnesses, that bit, if you can see someone and go, do you know what? I like that person, and that person has made me realize that I can be what I really am. That is what is hidden. And you know, that's why you've got Weird Pride. That's why you've made that, you know, this thing, which is in every room, you will have better conversations. You will have more wonderful time. You know, when the weird all get together and no one knows where it's going to go. And at the end of it, someone's taken the minutes and said, here are all the unfinished stories. And you go, well, we better continue tomorrow then. And I just love all that.
Although the autistic people go, I'm going for a lie down now. I can't take any more words in, and I might die if I hear another one. But please save the stories for me for another time. That too, realistically. But both things are true. Both things are very true. I'm glad that your liminal place, because you are a liminal figure, I would say, Robin, you're able to cross, you're a trickster figure, crossing boundaries, Radio 4 in science, and you're able to literally, and then in literature as well, we need the tricks, it's the trickster figures who can lead us more successfully to the crossing of the weird and the mainstream. Oh, yeah, that sounds wise. That sounds like something I would have
That
put in
was
my PhD.
very wise, yeah.
Yeah, very wise. I would love to be able to tour nationally and have a nationally published book about weirdness. It's not going to happen.
But no, but that's
niche.
you don't know that's not going to happen. You have no idea what's going to happen. And
Well,
also yeah.
that,
And to be honest, a lot of places I don't sell that many tickets.
I'm too knackered
I
to
have
do
a
the
lovely
national
time with the
tour.
people who do turn up.
I know. It's just I'm too. I do know. I haven't got the energy. What we need is an ADHD man who needs the dopamine and gets it every night. And I mean this very sincerely, and can do it. So not in a fulfill all your dreams way. I can do it. Yeah, I could do it. I'd kill, but I'd be broken. I would be broken. We need people who would not be broken to fulfill the necessary contractual needs of weirdness at this liminal time in the mainstream.
And I want you shouting that out when I see you when I'm at Whitley Bay. When I'm at the Bound, I want you shouting out, you are not fulfilling the contractual needs of weirdness.
I will. I'll write the contract. That's what I'll do. I'll write the contract. But you're fulfilling it already. You're doing it.
Well, everybody, what a lovely gathering. I better go to Leighton Buzzard. But
Yeah,
guys,
you better have, eh?
absolute joy. Thank you so much for asking me, Fergus.
for joining us.
And Kate, it's lovely to see you again, and everyone else who's been around as well. And hopefully I shall see you. Yeah, I'm doing loads of gigs in kind of libraries and stuff like that. So there's loads of free access gigs where I'll be waffling on, and I hope to see some of you there as well. Thank you.
We need you, Robin. Thank you,
Thank you,
guys.
and thanks everyone.
Thank you,
Okay.
Fergus.
Thank you.
Are we all going? Thank you, people in chat. I saw you, chat people. Oh, they're still there, some of them.